Hello and welcome back to Cast Iron, the podcast all about metal. It's been a little bit longer than I'd care to admit, but we are back, hopefully in more regular installments for the future. This week we are listening to Slipknot's Iowa. So this is a very special episode of Cast Iron because we have a special guest star with us. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, my name's Jess. I am the guest star on Cast Iron this week, and I will be helping you guys talk and listen to Iowa by Slipknot.
So what do you do?
What do I do? So I do a few things. I do a lot of social stuff. I do all the social media for a magazine you may have heard of called 5 out of 10. And I also do sort of other socially things, fill my time pretty well, like listening to metal, going to gigs.
It's a good start.
Yeah.
And of course, we're also joined by none other than the inimitable Lewis Clark.
Hello. All right, it makes sense that Jess does the social media for 5 out of 10 because that's why there's loads of Mega Drive stuff on there now. I get it.
We just got back from Australia and we were there for 3 weeks, and about a day after we got there, Jess's dad produced his old Mega Drive.
Excellent.
It was
out of his man cave with all the what do you have? All the Sonic games, like Turbo Outrun and things like that.
Excellent.
So,
very, very happy to hear about that. I was saying to Alan as well, like it was nice to hear someone who has a nonna as well, because that doesn't happen very often. If you don't know what we're talking about, basically, your nan in Italian is nonna.
Yes.
So I have an Italian nan as well. So
when we were in Australia, my nonna had her 93rd birthday.
Oh, so wow. That's awesome.
A bit of an amazing milestone. So it was great to be back to celebrate that.
Great innings.
Yeah, it was good. It's good to meet everybody. Although there was one bit when Jess's nonna turned around to me and just went, "Hey, you! What's the big idea?" I don't know if that meant stay away from my granddaughter, but it was certainly insinuated.
That typical
anyway,
Italian. They're not very subtle, are they? The Italians.
They don't mince their words, and I can appreciate that.
I like that a lot. Anyway,
so
let's carry
sadly
on.
today we are not in Australia. We are in Iowa. So we went to see Slipknot back in February.
Okay, tell me a little bit about that, because I've never seen Slipknot live, and I kind of don't want to now that Paul and Joey aren't in the band anymore.
Okay, well,
I'm a little bit precious about this lineup in particular.
So I didn't really like Slipknot until about a day before the gig. So
amazing.
I'm probably not the best person to ask. I don't know if it lived up to your 15-year-old metal fantasies.
Well, see, I've actually seen them before. So I saw them back in 2010 in Australia at Soundwave.
Okay.
And as Alan said, 15-year-old fangirl here. That when we saw them in London, one of my friends and I think it was when one of the tracks off Iowa actually came on, we basically just like turned to each other. She's the same age as me.
Because everything ends.
Yeah, everything ends. We turned to each other and just started screaming the lyrics into each other's faces, because it was like, being 15 again, back in our, bedrooms listening to angsty music. So so I think it's interesting, because I'm obviously coming from a point where, grew up listening to this this kind of stuff, and it was interesting to sort of take Alan along and
you make it sound like I was the old guy, whenever I used to go see him when I was 16, you'd see all the parents with their arms folded at the side of the gig. I really did just start to appreciate their music about a day before the gig. And I mean, in terms of the albums I quite like, Volume 3 and All Hope Is Gone. But one of the reasons we're covering Iowa is because it is 15 years old as of August.
Oh, God, I didn't even realise it was an anniversary. Jesus. No.
I know. I was 15, I'm 30. It's a real year of milestones.
Yeah. So, I have a very similar thing with Jess. Like, I grew up with this album. I think at the point I was listening to rock, when this came out, I was probably listening to things like Limp Bizkit and The Offspring. And someone gave me a copy of Iowa, and I didn't know what to think of it initially because it's such a dense record. It's so heavy and like overbearing. I didn't know how to like absorb it. It's such a weird record to like come into off the back of like something so approachable, I suppose.
So do we want to go straight into the album, or maybe before we do that, I thought we should talk a bit about what nu metal actually is, because Slipknot are sometimes called a nu metal group. And I think what they would probably say is, well, we're just metal, and it's because we came along at a similar time to your Limp Bizkits and Papa Roach and those kind of bands.
Yeah,
so
yeah, true that.
I think but I do think, after having listened to this today, that there actually are nu metal-y bits to Slipknot. I mean, to me, nu metal, I've made a couple of notes. I think the first thing is, there tends to be quite a lot of non-standard rock instrumentation. So you've got the kind of hip-hop turntable-y bits. Yep. You get vocals that are rapped rather than, nu metal kind of came as a response to things like grunge and stuff like that. So it's obviously a really different style of vocal delivery. The other thing about nu metal is it's kind of crap. and what I mean by that, because we don't judge people. What I mean is that it doesn't have a lot of artistic integrity to it.
Yeah, it's pop music mixed with heavy music. Yeah, totally.
It tends to be quite, it's commercially driven. It's radio friendly. I've also written that it perpetuates a notion of rebellion that feels kind of false. Whenever you hear Fred Durst rapping about how hard it is to be him, you're like, he's a multi-millionaire.
True.
And especially with Linkin Park, I think Linkin Park are probably the best of the nu metal groups. Actually, I think.
I'd argue Korn, I think, but
So I just never get into Korn, but I think like Hybrid Theory is quite a good album, actually.
Yeah, it's a really solid record.
One of the things that Linkin Park have now had to do, 10, 15 years later, is they're trying to reinvent themselves as a serious rock band.
Yeah.
So off the back of that, you've got Slipknot, who are at the same sort of time frame they're becoming popular. Their music does have a lot of instrumentation, turntabling. It's very percussively heavy, but I think it's also a very different thing. And actually, I think Iowa is a lot heavier than their other albums, and it has a lot of influences from like technical death metal and things like that. It's not just.
I'd say that Slipknot's first album was definitely the one where they were sort of heavily influenced by like nu metal scene at the time. There's a lot more obvious turntablism on that one, and more rap vocals and things, and there's the sort of composition's a little bit more like a rap metal record, even though it's still a very heavy album. Whereas Iowa is sort of the first step into sort of absorbing more genres of metal into their sound, and as a result it kind of becomes a heavier record. I'd say artistic merit, I suppose, comes with Iowa a little bit more than the first one. But it's not to say that I don't like those albums for different reasons, but there's definitely more of a I don't want to say progressive element to it, but there's definitely more of a just increase in like accomplished songwriting on this one in particular.
I think it's a bit more developed.
Yeah, that's the word I'm looking for.
And one of the things I found in my Wikipedia travels was the producer was saying that he, like, Slipknot were kind of, the first album really captures their energy, and they are known as a really, like, you've seen them twice, Jess, so know, but they are a really, like, I think if you could describe their live music as anything, it's definitely energetic. They're very good at bringing the crowd in. And there's a couple of choice one-liners because we were talking about this earlier, but what the songs make you feel like doing in this album. But I think that the recording of this album captures that energy, but it also captures a bit of the technicality that the first one doesn't. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, no, it's a really interesting record, and again, like, it was such a weird thing to take in initially because it was so, like, just the noise of it is just so intense in comparison to anything else I'd heard at the time. But it's a surprisingly memorable record, considering how much is going on at any given point.
I think we're gonna have we're gonna reach a point at the album at which I'm no longer capable of remembering it.
No, that's fair.
There's certainly plenty to talk about in the first half. So we will dive right in. And the first song is 515.
Which is just an introduction track, a little bit of texture and atmosphere, a bit of noise.
So I kind of famously hate intro tracks, which get on with the music. But actually, I I think this is quite effective as far as openers go because it's short. It's certainly not easy listening. It is just a guy screaming over a loop.
Do you know
but it
the
does set the
story?
scene a bit.
Do you know the story behind the screaming at the start? Because it's actually it's not Corey.
Yeah, no, I do.
What?
I do know this story.
So it's a Sid, the turntablist, and he, if I remember correctly, I think his grandfather had just died.
Yeah. He's screaming the word death. It's at his grandfather's passing, I'm pretty sure.
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah, that was the story behind it.
And it's basically him getting his grief out, essentially, and it makes it a little bit more harrowing knowing like that backstory, because it is just. Yeah, I mean, like the sound of his voice is just like grief-stricken. So yeah, it's an interesting introduction. It's got to be said, but yeah.
Well, I'm glad I didn't slag off that guy's grief then and said it was quite a good opener.
But yeah, no, it like I say, it just sort of sets up proceedings, and then we launch into the first song proper, which is "People Equal Shit." Here we go again, motherfucker!
Oh yeah, we should probably say there's probably going to be some language in this.
Yeah, there's going to be a fair old bit.
Do you remember when we started? Do you remember we started this podcast and we tried to make it like kid friendly, and then after a while, like, nah. I think it was because we were. I think it was
You said it'd be like language warning, and that's fine.
This podcast contains language that some people may find offensive.
It's annoying because like this era of metal in particular is a lot more aggressive, and there's a lot more open sort of like curses are fine. Whereas I think like as the genre, just metal in general has progressed, there's a little bit more sort of thought put into like vocals and things, and lyric writing. I think like definitely sort of nowadays feels a little bit more like, okay, let's try and actually say something of merit, you know?
Yeah, I think like my overall thing about this is I think that musically it's pretty good, but I think lyrically it is pretty bad.
Yeah, and I mean, not being funny, Corey Taylor has never been a great lyricist in general, but.
No.
But I think that this is kind of what Slipknot at that point in time was all about.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
I think
Yeah.
People Equal Shit, for me, sort of encompasses this album because it is just that angsty kind of like, and I completely agree with the lyrics absolutely meaning nothing.
Yeah.
But I think that in a way that's sort of what's really good about it is because, you know, we were reading through the lyrics this morning actually when we were listening to the album again.
Thank God we got that new Apple TV.
Really fantastic feature on the new Apple TV. I'm not getting paid. Yeah, but it's really it is really quite good. And just looking at them like, what the hell are they going on about? Like this is absolute rubbish. But I think that that's what it lends itself to.
I mean, it is misanthropic music.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's misanthropic and cathartic, and that's one of the weird things about, we talked about Slipknot live, and one of the things about seeing them live is I thought like the crowd were really good. And I think London gig crowds can be hit and miss.
Yeah, absolutely.
But actually, like, I thought that the crowd at Slipknot were very good, and although they were moshing, they were able to pick people up. It was closer to. I always find metal gigs in London aren't as good as punk gigs. And if you go to a punk rock gig, like if we went to see like Offspring and Bad Religion this year, but every time you go to a punk rock gig, people mosh, but they always pick each other up.
Yeah.
Whereas metal gigs, they don't. They just stomp on each other.
Yeah,
and Slipknot was a bit closer to that punk atmosphere. It felt violent, but not unsafe.
Yeah. No, that's nice. That's a nice thing because like that's the like when I grew up going to metal shows and things like I don't know 2001 2002 that was very much sort of like the atmosphere. So it's nice to see that sort of reciprocated like now. But yeah, what I'll say about like the vocals, one last thing, is that I think they're intentionally obnoxious to go with the fact that the music is very overt and obnoxious as well, you know? So it doesn't bother me too much, and there's a siren happening. Thanks for that.
Just adds to the vibe. Just use it.
So yeah.
So people equal shit. Well, one of the good things about it is that, as I said, I think this reminds me more of a tech death style rather than new metal. It's very drum driven and percussive. One of the differences between this and the first Slipknot album is that they've really turned up the snare in this.
Yeah.
And although you've got quite sludgy riffs going on, and it's got that kind of definitely sludgy rather than groovy riffs.
It's that down-tuned new metal sound, isn't it? Yeah.
That's like I don't know, drop F or some shit. No, that would be probably drop C or B. I was thinking F would be heavier, but that actually would be that'd be up tuning, wouldn't
Yeah.
it?
Yeah, it'd probably drop C, I would say.
Yeah, something
But
like that.
but it is like, I really like the drum driven style of it. I like that it's uncommon, and Slipknot's music is more percussive,
Yep.
rather than obviously led by either strong rhythm section and bass, or a lot of metal is essentially riff led.
Yep.
Well, I think that's one interesting thing just to say about the live aspect of their shows as well, because it is very percussive driven, having 9 members. And I think that I was reading an interview that Corey did a few years back, and he was saying that was one of the things, like, when they were recording, it was very, very hard to keep everybody on track. But in a live show, it works very well, because there's obviously that paired with all of the cool pyrotechnics. It's really an amazing kind of sight, and I think a song like this really lends itself to that kind of setup, which is really cool.
It's interesting because, like, if you listen to the album, there is an awful lot happening at any given point, and it's layered, it's very textured and atmospheric, and it's not something you would have thought could be produced live, but then you remember that there's like 9 members, and they've all got their own thing going on. There's a samplist, there's a turntablist, there are additional percussion, like,
And their main
members.
songwriter is actually Sean the Clown. He's actually the main guy behind the band. I know you always think it's Corey Taylor, but it's not. It's actually him, and I think that is probably why it sounds so percussion and rhythm heavy. It's a bit like I'm trying to think of other bands. Dream Theater, their main songwriter for many years was Mike Portnoy. And I think that comes across in the rhythm of it. And they're another band that have drum-led tracks, but in a very different way.
No, it's a really interesting setup, and I actually watched the last live DVD Sicknesses this week, just to sort of like prepare myself a little bit for this as well. And I do really like the way the additional percussion is sort of like used to emphasize a lot of the toms and bass drum, and it just creates like this lovely sort of chunky wall of noise that's just like, it really emphasizes the rhythm and the groove to the songs, and it looks a bit daft if you were if you looked at like Slipknot for the first time, you'd be like, what the hell is going on here? But in practice, it totally works. It's a strange thing that like you wouldn't have thought would work so well, but it really does give a lot of emphasis on the drive of the song. And People Equal Shit is a great opener, it's got to be said. I think
it is good. It's an unfortunate name. But,
it's just one of those things. I mean, there's a lot of cursing in it. Obviously, the actual title of the song gets repeated an awful lot, but it's also very memorable. Again, like, there's something about Slipknot in particular that I think that makes them very approachable, despite the fact that they're so heavy. Is they're so memorable. They've always got hooks, which is not something you really sort of associate with metal. And I think that really sort of it doesn't surprise me why this went UK #1, like this album, because it's just like there are so many memorable tracks on it, and for such a heavy record to have that sort of consistency is pretty impressive, I think.
Yeah, I think when we get further into it,
we'll have that discussion as we get there.
Yeah, we'll definitely have that discussion. There's a point at which it shifts, and I think it is a bit too front loaded. So the next track is Disaster Piece. So this is a bit more groovy and moshy. Again, we've got some really technical drumming, and it is a bit of a sonic assault. You talked about how it's a wall of sound, and there's a lot going on here.
Yeah, absolutely. But again, like, it's such a catchy song. The chorus, I like, noises. So good. I love this song so much. Disaster Pieces is one of the highlights for me.
He definitely played this one live, didn't he?
Yeah.
I think they named their first live DVD Disaster Pieces as well, which is why I often get the bloody name confused. But yeah, it's one of the highlights for me. It's a really memorable song. There's a lot going on, and it has the synonymous Slipknot line for me. I want to slit your throat and fuck the wound.
I want to push my face in and feel the swoon.
Which,
horrible.
fun fact, is the most violent line to ever feature in an album that reached to #1 in the UK.
Yeah, I think I can agree with you on that one totally.
Wow.
So
pushed out Craig David then. his 7 days of sex, but that was with a live person.
It's one of my favourite songs of the album.
It's really very good.
I mean, there's not too much to say about it. It's a very, the structure of the songs is very similar. especially in the more intense tracks, so things like People Evil Shit. It's, we've got incredibly heavy build up, really intense verses, and then like a really memorable chorus that sort of ever so slightly sort of strips things back a little bit, like instrumentation wise, so that you can really focus on the vocals. And that's kind of the Slipknot way, I think, if throughout a lot of this record.
One of the things that this song does, that is almost like a precursor to some of their later stuff, is there is a shift near the end where you get more clean vocals, the drums are subdued, you can hear the bass coming into the mix.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
it allows for a bit of vulnerability.
Oh, right, yeah. No, I can see that.
And there's not a lot of that in this album, and I think one of the problems for me is that I like that is built into that song, but I don't like whenever it takes up entire songs.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I see, yeah.
If you see where I'm coming from, yeah.
No, that's fair.
But I think it's a really good track.
Yeah, absolutely. Like a really good one. And I think like with you talking specifically about like the the more sung vocals that sort of intersperse things. I think if we move on to My Plague, that comes very obvious. It's the first time you can really sort of like hear Corey singing, I suppose, especially on the chorus on this one. This was one of the singles as well.
Yeah, this is the second single, I think.
It was, yep, that one with the Resident Evil Apocalypse video.
It is, yeah.
No, it wasn't Apocalypse, it was the first film. Sorry. The Apocalypse was Killswitch.
Was that End of Heartache?
That's the one, yeah.
That's the one where that's the one where they took out all of the verses, pretty much.
Yeah.
Or they get rid of all the screamy bits.
Yeah. Well, they do a very similar thing actually with My Plague. There's a New Abortion mix, it's called, which is the single mix, and they basically just Corey re-recorded all his vocals so that he's singing them. They did a very similar thing with Wait and Bleed, where the verses are sort of sung or like spoken instead of screamed, and they do a very similar thing with My Plague. The verses are sort of sung instead of screamed, like on the album version. So yeah,
it's interesting that screaming has never really made it mainstream, has it?
Yeah, I think it is a barrier for a lot of people, I think, and despite the fact that there's lots of non sort of melodious lyrics out there like rapping and spoken word and things that are accepted, I think screaming, because there's the barrier of you can't really make out what they're saying. I think that really is like quite a difficult thing for a lot of people to overcome. So yeah, it's always interesting to see like how things are adapted to make them a little bit more radio friendly.
I think certainly whenever I first started getting into like the heavier side of metal, into like melodic death and stuff, the screaming was a barrier to me adopting it, and it takes a while to train you on that. Like when I think about something like I don't know, like Jess or Race or any of my favorite Melodeath albums, like that is that's an assault, and I think it does take you a while to train your ears to it, to understand what the vocals are doing. And one of the things we've got one of the things Apple Music has added is they give you a new music mix like Spotify do every Friday.
Okay, that's interesting.
And I was really struck by how all of the new metal songs, it's just this kind of pig grunting noises. It's going,
yeah.
And then In Flames brought a new song out the other day. I was like, this is so much better. It's like at least it's a different type of screaming.
Yeah.
And that's one thing about. Okay, you might not like the screaming vocal, but I think Slipknot do it very well.
Yeah, absolutely.
They do the mix. I think they get the mix right, because there are parts in the songs where it is quite sort of growly and things like that. But I think that especially with this track, to keep it radio friendly and to make it like, so they've really perfected the art, I think, of putting together this for the time a quite heavy track.
Yeah.
That is, that people will play on the radio.
Yeah. It's the structure of it as well, isn't it? It's a very sort of verse, chorus, bridge, chorus kind of structure, which is more traditional. And yeah, I totally understand why you picked this one as a single. But yeah, the first single they picked off this, which we haven't got to yet, is... I was very surprised, actually, by you picking that one as a single, but we'll get to that. So, shall we move on to the next song? Because I like this song.
The only thing I was going to say before we move on from My Plague is that, again, their lyrics are universally dreadful. And I don't think that they're dreadful because of the content. Like, I think, slitting people's throats and fucking the wound isn't great. It's not something I would personally choose to do. But I think there's something about a lack of insight and possibly a lack of sincerity that I don't like about it.
Yeah,
it feels a bit like a horror movie, almost like a put on.
Yeah, well, it's like I say, like if you take it at face value and just say, like, right, the music's obnoxious, so the vocals should be obnoxious as well. I think I can let it go a little bit because I kind of know what they're trying to do stylistically. But yeah, you do have to kind of ignore the fact that there is like no nuance whatsoever to the vocals.
I think the thing too is that when you think about this in the context of listening to it when you're 15, and we were at so we have a writers group that we go to in Oxford, and we were there last night, and basically the whole premise of the evening was to read out things that we like, the first things that we ever wrote. And one of the guys that was there was reading out some old poetry.
He was also at the Slipknot gig.
Yeah. And so you're listening to his old poetry from when he was like 15, 16, and it's just like, it's absolutely dreadful. Like, it's cringeworthy.
Yeah.
But I think that
I am dead. I am a murderer.
When you're that age, and I think that's the thing that always gets me when I re-listen to all of this stuff. It's like, you know, no matter how far time can go, I can still sort of regress and just be like, oh my god, this is like, even though it's completely horrible.
Yeah.
I realize it's completely horrible, but it's just like it's like a time machine.
Yeah, no, absolutely, I get that completely. Yeah, it's an interesting thing, isn't it, to come back to? Mm-hmm. But yeah, so yeah, moving on, I suppose. We've got Everything Ends.
You are wrong, fucked and overrated. I think I'm gonna be sick and it's your fault. This is the end of everything. You are the end of everything. I haven't slept since I woke up and found my whole life was a lie, motherfucker. This is the end of everything. You are the end of everything!
Which has my favourite introduction on the album. You're all wrong, fucked and overrated. I think I'm going to be sick and it's your fault. Again, just no nuance whatsoever, but it don't half grab your attention.
I think that this was definitely one of the most popular tracks.
I can imagine everybody singing along to this one. God,
this was the one we were I was definitely screaming out. It's fantastic.
It's so I think like vocally, like the structure of this one, I think is one of the most memorable songs on the album. Again, I know it's pretty obnoxious and not particularly artistic in any way, but it's just so memorable. It's so catchy. I think
this is a bit more new metal.
Yeah, I get that.
Because a lot of the vocals are delivered quite staccato and rappy, and including the subject matter as well. I think this is actually a good way of illustrating the Slipknot twist on the new metal stylings. Yeah,
I think that. Yeah, I think you're pretty much hit the nail on the head with that one. I mean, there's a lot of like, I love you, hate, and all this stuff, and it's just like, it's very sort of angsty teenage kid lyrics. But I've got a really big soft spot for Everything Ends. It's just such a memorable song.
It is undeniably catchy.
Yeah.
I think again, if you compare this to some of the tracks off the first album, you'll really see how the band's sound has evolved. Like, one of the best songs off their first album is "Surfacing," which is very much
I love "Surfacing." It's such a great song.
And that's my brother's his weightlifting song. And,
I can see that. Yeah.
But it does have more of like sort of screechy, high pitched guitar, more sampling and stuff like that. It's very different to this, which again is sludgy, dense, percussive. It's very, very different. It's a similar kind of energy expressed in a very different way.
It's very groovy, like as a record. I was going to say as well, like production wise, how do you feel about this one? Because this is obviously a Ross Robinson produced album, synonymous with a lot of new metal stuff. Produced Korn's debut. He's basically been sort of attached to a lot of like that new wave of heavy metal style stuff. And
I think the production's pretty good. I think their next album is Rick Rubin, who's like one of my all-time least favourite producers.
Well, see, I think Ross Robinson's pretty over recommended. I think there's something about him. Like, I think Iowa in particular is probably what I would say was his pinnacle. It's bizarrely bright for such a heavy record. You can catch all the elements of the sound, and it's very it's very easy to absorb in that sense. but I feel like often he underproduces things quite a lot. He obviously did the first album as well, which is a very different style as well. He did Cancer Bat's latest album, Searching for Zero, and I was really disappointed with that. It sounds like enormously underproduced. It sounds like demos, and yeah, it's a bit strange. He did like the Korn album where they sort of return to their normal sound, Korn 3, Remember Who You Are, and that suffers from that as well. That's very sort of underproduced and a bit sort of meh. But yeah, Iowa for me is just like, well, he's really hit the nail on the head here. Like, he really understands this band very well.
Yeah, I think it's really bang on, and probably I think the biggest success in the production is that it feels like a wall of sound without being overwhelming.
Yeah, absolutely. That's definitely
that's very hard to do, right? Because it could have easily, like, you can pick out all the individual elements when you whenever you need to.
Yeah,
there are bits when the bass creeps in. I think, as you said, Jess, the vocals they're sometimes they're at the forefront, other times they're not, but they're always where they need to be.
Yeah, no, it's a very good point, actually. It's actually quite interesting that we've chosen this one off the back of doing Strapping Young Lad, because that's a very similar sort of environment where like there's an awful lot going on production wise. Like there's a big wall of noise happening, and it's all very sort of easy to absorb. Like the production on both those these records is like fantastic.
I guess if Strapping Young Lad sounds like a chainsaw going off in an aircraft hangar, which is probably fair, this is like it's like somebody beating together cans in an abattoir.
It's the chainsaw entering flesh. There you go.
Somebody coming in and fucking the wind.
Jesus.
This is really not suitable for kids.
No, it isn't at all. Right, it's the Satan song next.
551 and I'm 666. 555 I'm 666. When I get 555 I'm 666. What's it like to be a heretic if you 555 I'm 666? What's it like to be a heretic?
So I think this is probably the closest that the album gets to actually saying anything meaningful.
Yeah, true.
Because to me, well, my interpretation of this, and it's the only interpretation I have of a Slipknot song, because they do kind of, wear their heart on their sleeve.
Yeah.
This one seems to be about their brushings with fame and people talking about them, being heretics to an extent.
Yeah,
and
I
how
can see that.
They seem family unfriendly, and that's what it's about. And but what does the chorus actually mean? Apart from them getting to say 666, what does, if you're 555, then I'm 666? What does somebody? Why would anybody describe themselves as 555?
Yeah, it's basically a setup to say 666. I mean, there's plenty of hymn lyrics where they do that as well. So
That's true, yeah.
there's definitely something on Deep Shadows where it's like 777666, if I remember correctly, just for the hell of being able to use that number.
Well, sure, him did. Sure, their first album's Greatest Love Songs, Volume 666. Isn't it?
And then there's Your Sweet 666 to begin with. Yeah,
and they also him do the really annoying thing where there's like 66 tracks on their first album.
Yeah, just for the hell of it.
But most of them are just
if I remember correctly, it runs for 66 minutes as well. Specifically, is overkill a little bit there. So
you're saying as him fans, it would be hypocritical of us to take the piss out of Slipknot for
yeah,
him day.
Very much so.
Okay, yeah, fair. Okay, fair enough. I'll concede that.
But yeah, the Heretic Anthem is such a good song. Again, like Everything Ends, it's really, really memorable. It's one of the two. It's one of the two songs that I think sort of encapsulates this record for me. It has all those elements of the sound. It's very intense. It's very heavy. It's very in your face. But at the same time, chorus is infinitely one of the most memorable on the record, and it's just a great time. It's a really good, like, moshy metal song.
I think it just encapsulates Slipknot as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
When you think about the band, even like sort of all of the stuff that they've done, that's kind of the iconic, like those lyrics. And I guess, it's the same with Everything Ends. Like they've got this album, I think, has more sort of iconic Slipknot than I think any other does.
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
It's got those iconic lines and those sort of iconic riffs, and that sort of, it really encapsulates the Slipknot feel, I think. And I think what people think what people think a Slipknot person would like.
Yeah.
Like, and growing up, like, being into this kind of music and, like, explaining it to, like, my family and stuff. Like, this was the pinnacle of it.
Yeah,
He's using the throat wound as a metaphor for society. Yeah. Honest, Mum, please, Mum. No, Mum, don't take my CDs away now. What was it you'd said that what was it you said about Disaster Piece when we were talking about this earlier? You said that it's the kind of song you could mosh to on your own in your bedroom.
Oh no! This was it was Everything Ends. I basically said that it's so confrontational that it would make you want to start a fight in an empty room. Like it's that confrontational. Like it's just
stop looking at me.
The musical. It's the musical equivalent of adrenaline. Like you just sort of want to start. Like makes you want to start punching something.
Oh God, you're full of all the quotes today. They should be using you for the
great.
box track.
I had to warn Jess before we started because we did the thing that you and I do. You start talking about the album before we record. It's like save the gems.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Write them down.
Oh, that's really cool. But yeah, all right. I think we're going to move into the part of the record where I think it starts to lose itself a bit. For me, anyway.
So next we've got Gently.
Which is very just atmospheric.
It's like space rock or something.
Yeah,
it's really,
yeah.
And so this seems to happen in every album we cover, where you get the mid album. And we should probably put a slow one in.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes a breather is okay, but for me this really kills the momentum.
Yeah.
And whenever we covered City, we really liked that it was just full on pretty much the whole way through the album.
Yeah.
And I think it depends if you really want a breather, but I don't think Slipknot fans necessarily do.
No, especially if you're going to just like have 5-6 songs, like just back wall to wall, like bangers back to back, and then all of a sudden it's like, right, now we need to take a rest, and it's like, no, you don't. I think if you could have, trimmed the fat off a lot of this record, you would have had an absolute blast of an album. But yeah,
this would be okay at the very end of the album.
Yeah,
they could have just shifted that. It is an outro track that they've stuck in the middle.
And it's, like the song at the end is very similar actually in style. Maybe a little bit longer.
Definitely longer.
Yeah, but Gently's actually one of the songs that appears on their very, very first demo album.
Make, Kill, Feed, Repeat.
That's re-recorded on this, and that's quite interesting as well because Iowa is also the first album that Jim Root actually contributes complete writing to, because on the first album it was actually most of it was written and performed by Josh Brainard, who was their original guitarist, and he left during the recording process of the debut, and Jim joined right at the end, and I think he only contributed writing and playing to like 1 or 2 songs, one of them in Purity, which isn't even on the original release. It's like a bonus track. So yeah, this is his first like major contribution to Slipknot on like a complete album, which is interesting as well. And yeah, Gently it comes from before his time, so yeah, that's quite interesting that it's here, because like I say, this is sort of Josh Brainard original era because it's off the demo record.
I'm actually quite interested to hear their debut one, because apparently it's a really interesting mashup of styles, and it's like almost like jazz fusion and stuff going on in there.
Such a bonkers record. Honestly, it is worth listening to just to like, how did Slipknot come from this to this, but there is a lot of you can hear the elements like that sort of become them later, but it is a very, very much a different band, and it was released initially like supposed to be their debut record, and they've since sort of like gone back on that and said like, no, it's a demo. And I agree that they sort of should push back on that, because it is a very, very different record. It doesn't thematically sort of sit with the rest of the stuff. But it's totally worth listening to just because it is such an interesting, weird record. But yeah, Gently comes from that era. They've given it a little bit more instrumentation, like it has a bit more of a riff going on this version as opposed to the original one, which is very sort of just texture and atmosphere, which this one totally still has. It's just that they've tried to songify it, I suppose.
Songify.
Making up words, God. But yeah,
Songify just sounds like some kind of like startup.
God. Pretty sure it's an app, actually.
Songify. Shazam.
Yeah, well, yeah, totally. It's got that sort of quality to it, isn't it? But yeah, it's not a particularly standout, memorable song, is it?
It's a load of guff. Let's move on.
Yeah.
That's fair.
So, next up, we've got the other single, which is Left Behind.
I ignore you as I close my eyes. I'm feeling all slipping away. I can't touch you. We all got left behind. We let it all slip away. I ignore you as I close my eyes. I'm feeling all slipping away. I can't touch you. We all got left behind. We let it all slip away.
Which
So,
is the first introduction to a lot of people's experience with this record, because that was released pre the album. It's a fucking heavy track, isn't it? For a choice of a single, I'm really surprised they chose this, because it's one of the most intense songs on the record. I wouldn't say it was like one of the most memorable, but like
I think it's a bit more radio friendly. It is more. It is more melodic
because of the vocals are clean throughout.
They're not quite.
Almost,
they're clean for this record.
Yeah,
they haven't had to mess around with the vocals at any point to make a radio version for this, which I suppose shows you that the vocals are a little bit more acceptable for like a radio audience, I suppose. But and
it still has that same like sort of chorus verse, and it's a very sort of memorable. And I think that's the thing they've picked, and you can see the ones they've picked as singles.
Yeah.
Are obviously all of the ones that are quite memorable, and they are quite sort of easy to just headbang to, and it's quite widely appreciated, I think.
It is a bit of a wreck the house song.
Oh
isn't it?
God, I mean,
house party metal.
Yeah. It's quite interesting that you say that, because the video was obviously does quite match that like visually very well, because it's a lot of like playing in a house and it gets destroyed by the rain and stuff.
Oh, was that? There was one where was it Duality?
Duality is the one where they actually do
got their friends to actually wreck the house. Yeah,
maybe
that's why I'm thinking of it that way.
But
I really like this track. I think it's one of my favorite
song.
ones on
Really,
it. But
really
I do tend to like more melodic stuff.
It's the riff for me at the start. I love that sort. It's got that really sort of grindy, like biting, almost like biker metal-y style at the start.
Do you know what it reminds me of? Like, and a lot of this album, because it is kind of a little bit nightmare-inducing and creepy.
Yeah.
The starting riff kind of reminds me of like nails on a chalkboard.
I can hear that.
Everyone listening to this now is going to be like, oh, because I do that every time someone even mentions that. But that's what makes this track so great, and I think it's really interesting that like it was pushed out as being so mainstream at the time when it came out too, because it's quite brutal.
Yeah, it's a really heavy song, honestly. Yeah,
again gets the creep factor in there.
Yeah, lots of atmosphere. Song.
Yeah, I think like if you wanted to introduce people to Slipknot, this is probably a good starting point.
Yeah, absolutely.
I wouldn't be like, oh, listen to this Disaster Piece.
Yeah,
you'll like it, Mum. You'll like it. Happy Christmas.
I suppose it's the most approachable, like heavy track on this record. I suppose
it's like Slipknot for your nan.
Maybe not.
Maybe not.
That's probably snuff, isn't it?
Yeah, true. Right.
So after this, we just slide into the shit back half.
Yeah, it really does sort of lose itself. I quite like the shape. I think it's good.
I quite like the shape too.
Dull verses. I think that's its real problem. They're very sort of like spoken, and there's a lack of instrumentation. They're not very memorable, but it does pick up in the chorus.
The chorus is quite good, and it's a bit industrial. It's almost Nine Inch Nails-y kind of a sound to it.
Yeah. And then we've got I Am Hated, which I would say is the most like the first album.
The old one is my enemy, and I'm a walking target. Significant. I complain for the love of a mom. I can't stay because I can't be stopped. Motherfuckers alive in process. I know you're on time. The same old process. Let me tell you, it's gonna be.
it's very rapped, and it's got that sort of like dun, 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 dun.
And
It's got
scratchy.
that,
And
yeah. It's I like it. It's but it is very much like almost we're sort of like devolving a little bit. It's very much the Slipknot of old.
It's got some interesting drum fills.
Yeah, no, it's.
But at this point in the album, I was really starting to feel quite tired.
Yeah, and then we get Skin Ticket, which is pretty. There's nothing really worth stand out on this one.
Just,
nothing but zero and cancer, and people conspire together, running and going forever.
So what was it? I've got a Jess quote written down here.
Go on.
You can read this out.
It's just weird whispering fucking psychos. But it is, like, I think when I was saying before about how, you know, this album can be a little bit like nightmare inducing, this could be, you know, some creepy horror. This could be, you know, like all of those clowns running around like in the news right now. This is what they'd be playing on their phones running around.
I've come to collect my skin ticket.
Oh, it is. I mean, again, I can't like shit on it too much because I quite like the fact that there's a lot of sort of texture and ambience to this sort of stuff, and I think it's interesting to hear that side of the band because it does sort of permeate their later stuff, especially All Hope Is Gone and Volume 3. There's a lot more sort of like ambience, like let's not go completely balls to the wall all the time, you know. Let's think about how we can interpret that in a way that works with the music. But unfortunately, because this song is just that, it kind of doesn't have anything that grabs you. And I'm surprised as well because they actually performed this song live. If you got the, I think it's 9, 9 Live, yeah. It's on the second disc as like a live performance, and I'm like, you'd really want to play this live to an audience? I think it's gonna, you know, they're going to fall asleep. Like instrumentation wise, it's just there's not much going on.
That was a bit of a strange choice for a live
and
record.
Then we kind of get the same sort of thing with New Abortion and Metabolic. They're very sort of just run of the mill.
New Abortion is quite new metally, and it brings the speed back up, but it doesn't really make a lick of sense, like lyrically.
It just doesn't like strike me as anything particularly memorable in any way. It's not something I'd ever recommend to anybody to listen to on its own, which is at odds with an awful lot of the first half of this record, which is just like listen to this song, listen to this song, listen to this song.
Yeah, I think this is the problem with it, is that I think, and I mean we've said this before with other albums, but if they had cut this down from, I think it's over an hour long, and if it's 66 minutes, and if they've gone full hymn, but it's well over an hour.
Yeah.
But if they had chopped out a bit of I think if they chopped out the I Am Hated Skin Ticket stuff and brought it down to about 45 minutes, it would be
perfect. Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with you on that one. And Metabolic as well. I can't even remember Metabolic, and I listened to it yesterday.
You got anything to say about Metabolic, Jess?
No, basically this whole back half of the album's just
you
kind
do
of
lose
like,
yourself a little bit on this one.
Yeah.
It's a shame. And then to end, we get the title track, which is another re-recording from Make, Kill, Free, Repeat. Originally called Killers Are Quiet on the first album, and
now it's called Iowa.
Now it's called Iowa. I don't mind Iowa actually, because I quite like that there's a very obvious riff that is always there, and it gives it that sort of driving quality, a little bit sort of subdued, and it's sort of, I think it's a bass riff actually. I think it's Paul's like do 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 do. You get that like throughout the whole song, and it feels like the way the album should end, and that's why I quite like it. I don't think this album could have ended on a real rager, because it would have just felt really abrupt when it stopped. I think it needs this sort of lingering creepiness to end it, because
I think it really kind of encompasses, but I don't know that it works outside the album though. Like if it was just
absolutely.
just listening to this song by itself, it's like you said, you know, it's that sort of slow ending for it, but I'm not sure it works as a standalone as
I
some
mean,
other
we
tracks.
I can
hung out
agree
the-
with that,
We
yeah.
hung out the washing to Iowa this morning, and I thought,
Amazing.
and yeah, I think that says a lot about domestication over the years. Used to be your mum coming in with the clean clothes while you're listening to this, and or you just didn't clean your clothes at all. 'Cause you're one of those stinky metalheads. Used to hang out in
Crusties. There we go.
Belfast city centre on a Saturday afternoon. But yeah, it is very long.
Yeah,
It's like
15 minutes song. I
15
think,
minutes.
yeah. There's no like. I assumed like when I see the song length, I'm like, oh, there's going to be a silence and a secret track at the end. No, it's just one
No.
solid piece of music.
It's
I'm
just-
like, oh, okay. So I mean, fair play to writing a song that long, but at the same time, it does really drag on
But
unnecessarily.
it's sort of like when I sort of see songs that long as well, it kind of reminds me of like, you know, when you're in your first band in high school and you were doing band practice and you were like recording a massive long song because you're like, this is so amazing, everyone's gonna love it. And then you re-listen to it again and it was obviously really fun for them to play.
Yeah,
It was
yeah.
obviously really fun to create and that's why it is that long. But it's kind of, I guess, outside of that, you lose a lot of that kind of, that sort of in-depth because it's not you playing it.
Yeah.
And so I'm guilty of doing songs like that. I'm pretty sure they're on an EP somewhere buried so no one can ever hear them. But it's like, you know, it's stuff...
The I Hate My Family EP.
No.
Never.
But it's yeah, it's like, it's those kind of things that obviously there was some reasoning as to why it was that long. And that, I guess that's why I would think it would be that long.
Yeah,
It is interesting that they have put in a couple of songs recorded in previous albums because according to all accounts, the actual recording process of this was pretty torturous. Like Corey Taylor was going through serious alcohol addiction. Loads of the band members had drug addictions, and if you go into the research archives, by which of course I mean Wikipedia, apparently he was like, he was cutting himself on the floor and throwing up while he was recording Iowa, and it's like you listen to it and think, really?
Yeah.
I mean, maybe that is just what they told Kerrang for the purpose of shifting it, making himself seem edgy.
Yeah, I can see that a little bit. There's a very, very good documentary that comes with the 10th anniversary edition on DVD that's worth checking out because it basically sort of talks about the process of recording the record and the touring cycle for it and things. And it's very heartfelt as well because the 10th anniversary edition of the record was released after Paul dying, and they mention it quite a lot. And there's a scene in particular where they're interviewing Joey, and he just sort of like he's trying to say something meaningful about the record and he just can't get it out because he's tearing up about Paul and stuff, and he's just like he just ends the question with, I was the heaviest album ever made and this is Paul's legacy, and then he fucks off, and it's just like it's like you can see it was still very raw at that point, and it's like it's strange because in that context of them sort of like still sort of mourning over him and to then discuss an album like this bleak and this dark, it really sort of it's strange how that works strangely well in that context. But yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that as well. Like this feels like a jam because it reminded me of the debut Limp Bizkit record, $3 Bill, ends on a jam song called Everything, and I think that's a really, really long song, and it's very much like this in that style. It's sort of just texture and atmosphere, and yeah, it's obviously just a new metal thing that people were doing at the time. Just stick a jam on the end. That'll work. But yeah, no, it's a perfectly acceptable ending to the record. I think it's the way it should have ended. But like you say, it doesn't stand as a song on its own, I don't think.
So I guess the real question is, does Iowa stand the test of time? Is it indeed the heaviest album ever recorded? Now, at the time of recording this, I haven't listened to everything, but so maybe we'll revisit this in 30 years. But I think it is still a very heavy album.
I think it's their best record, even to this day. I think if I think about Slipknot albums as albums, a lot of the other records have singles and not so many good album tracks, whereas I think Iowa has the best ratio of singles and album tracks. Like we say, the last half does sort of lose itself a little bit. It probably drags on a little bit too long, but there's so many good songs like early on. Like I think once we get up to Left Behind, it feels like you've really gone on a journey and you've absorbed like some great songs. And that's a good, that's like I say, that's 8 tracks up until that point, and that's a pretty solid.
Yeah, definitely.
Set of songs.
And I think that it definitely stands the test of time with that as well. Because,
Yeah, absolutely.
If you look at their sort of discography as it stands, like I completely agree that I would pick out Iowa as the pinnacle of what is a Slipknot album.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm the same.
I was never into them that much in the day to say whether it's a definitive album or not, but I think it definitely does stand the test of time. And certainly the first 8 or so tracks, are it just feels a bit unstoppable. I think that's what lets down the back half. I mean, that's okay because you can always just stop listening at that point, which I imagine many people did. But I think it still holds up really well.
There's one thing I really love about it. And when I was listening to this album again during the week at work, it's really nice because it was actually my boss's boss had come up behind me to ask me a question, and I'm pretty sure that he saw I was listening to Slipknot, which is hilarious. But it kind of makes you feel like, and especially if you sort of have that kind of connection to the album, you're listening to it when you were younger. It kind of makes you feel like it sort of transports you back to that point in your life. You realize like I'm a proper adult now. And I remember I was in Barcelona in a metal bar, and I was sitting with Alan, and I kind of just turned to him and said to him like, oh my God, have I sold out? Like,
I was the only person wearing an actual shirt with a collar in the punk rock bar.
Amazing.
And so I think the thing that I love about this album, sort of just as a whole, is it kind of does, it makes you question sometimes, like, who am I anymore? But it's interesting.
Am I wrong? Fucking overrated.
And as sort of 10 years later, listening to this at 24 rather than at 14, it's sort of like, well, holy shit, like, what's the difference? But it's still, you can still pick up all of those riffs that you knew 10 years ago, and it's like it's never changed, which I think that's the kind of measure of whether an album stands the test of time or not, is whether or not you kind of, sort of roll your eyes and go, oh God, did I really listen to this? You can listen to it again and be like, yes, this is fucking awesome.
Yeah, and I also think that we've all come from kind of different backgrounds of listening to this. You guys listened to it when it first came out. I just kind of rolled my eyes and didn't bother. But I could come back to it now and really enjoy it. I think that does does suggest to me that it does indeed stand the test of time.
I totally have the same thing with Jess. It's like when I put it on, it's not like cringy. It's like, yes, this is my youth, and then I have a bedroom mosh, and it's all a good time. It's a great record.
I definitely have some cringy stuff. Like there's definitely some cringy stuff that we'll get into at another point.
We need to come back. We need to come back to do Evanescence sometime, because I saw a lot of kid Jess photos in Australia.
Excellent.
So
stuff.
now we need to do our. It wouldn't be an episode of Cast Iron without doing the usual guess each other's favorite tracks.
This is going to be difficult in a triangle. How do we guess who's?
I think we should guess yours, and then you can guess ours, because I'm pretty sure my favorite's the same as Jess's. Okay, hold on. We're just going to confer for a second.
We've decided.
Right, Jess,
we've decided.
Go for it.
Okay, so we think that your favourite is Disaster Piece.
You're wrong.
Oh no!
My favourite is the Heretic Anthem.
Oh,
very good. Okay.
So yeah,
him fan.
There you go. Well, there you go. I'm gonna say that I think. So you say you both have got the same song?
Yeah.
I think it's Everything Ends.
Yeah.
Excellent. It would have been between those two for me as well. I initially thought Everything Ends is probably my favourite, and then I remember the Heretic Anthem, and I love the build. I love seeing the show on the Disaster Pieces DVD, and like how they sort of build up, and then they get the flames at the start, and it's just like, this is such good, like, visually it matches the song so well.
It's amazing. Next time they tour, you definitely have to come with us.
Yeah, maybe I see, this is the thing, I'm very precious about this lineup, and I'm like, I don't know if I want to see them with not the right drummer and not the right bassist, you know?
No.
But I do feel like I do need to see Slipknot at some point, because they are, like, quite important to my growth into metal and stuff, and like I say, this was very sort of gateway for me getting into heavier stuff. So yeah, I do owe it a lot of favors, and I think I should probably see them at some point. But
and I think having seen them in the two different lineups, they do both put on a pretty comparable, like, amazing show.
Yeah.
Like, I think there's nothing quite like, people sort of jumping off massive, like, snare drums into the crowd, and it's just like it's something special. It really is.
No, it needs to happen, I think, at some point. But yeah, it's just one of those things. It's like, God, that lineup's never going to make a record again. And that was really for me as well. Like, I don't know, Alan, have you listened to the latest Slipknot album at all?
Yeah, not that much. No,
it's a very sort of. It's like they're trying to impersonate Iowa, and not like it's not the same band
what's
that
the single
made
off
Iowa.
that? Is it Negative One?
Negative One, Devil in Eye as well was another one. I quite like the
Devil in Eye's okay.
I quite like the Negative one because it's very sort of Iowa-esque in its sort of composition. But it's just, as an album, it's not very memorable. And again, it suffers from being incredibly bastard long, which just, it's obviously a Slipknot thing. We just make really long records for some reason.
It's key to the artistic integrity. So once somebody has exhausted the Slipknot back catalogue and moshed their own head into their wall, what album would you recommend for them to go to next?
Right, okay. I had a bit of a hard time picking for this one because I was like, should I pick something that's, I suppose, like, that sounds similar? Because I don't want to, like, mention, because the things that come to my head with, like, music this dense is Strapping Young Lad and Full of Hell, which I've already mentioned in the previous episode, because we did that on Strapping Young Lad, and one of the records
need to
was
broaden
Full of
your
Hell.
tastes.
Yeah, and I'm just like, because I don't really listen to an awful lot of, like, really dense, like, wall of noisy style metal. So yeah, those were the two that came to mind. But then I was like, I'd like to approach it as Slipknot being a gateway metal band, and that was so the way I started listening to metal. So the two albums I've chosen are by what I would regard as other gateway metal bands. Not necessarily they sound similar to Slipknot, but just like that they sort of they would help someone get into heavier music, basically. So the first one I've chosen is Untouchables by Korn, which is one of my favourite Korn albums, and probably their darkest and most sort of consistent. A very sort of low, down-tuned, sort of groovy metal album, which we've mentioned obviously quite a lot talking about Slipknot. It's not as intense. It's not very, Korn don't make fast music, to be honest with you.
What are some of the songs I might have heard off that? Because I've certainly heard of the album. But
Here to Stay is the big one off that one.
Yeah.
Thoughtless is another one.
Here to Stay was quite big on Kerrang back in the day.
I love Here to Stay. It's an amazing song. But yeah, that album in particular has that sort of groovy, sort of slow, down-tuned element to it is like permeates the whole record, and that's why I'd recommend it in light of Slipknot, which has somewhat of that element in their sound. And then the other one is something a little bit more fast-paced, but again, very much a gateway band, System of a Down, and I'm going to choose their self-titled album over Toxicity, because I think the self-titled is very sort of wild and a bit off the hook, and it just kind of like does its own thing, and it's very varied. It's got a lot of weird songs. It's got some real slow, sort of moody stuff like Spiders. But then it has stuff like Sweet Pea and Sugar, which are all just bonkers and off the wall.
Fantastic.
Sugar's another house mosh song.
Yeah. And again, like it's sort of it sits with that vibe of like Slipknot's sort of weirdo rebellion kind of thing going on, and it's like it does feel like it's somewhat against the mold of metal at the time, and that was why I decided to choose that one.
See, with System of a Down, I think my favourite System album, I get just mesmerised.
I'd agree with you. I'd agree with you completely.
And one of them is really good and one of them is dreadful. And Mesmerise is the good one, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's Mesmerise is the one with BYOB, I think.
That's the one.
Hypnotize is the one that's just a load of guff. And
I completely agree with you on that one. But it was just like, thematically, I think the self-titled System album is a little bit more Slipknotty, I guess. Whereas I think as songwriters, System have really progressed by when we get to Mesmerise, they're actually making songs at that point. So
So my pick is relatively similar band to Slipknot, but I think it ends a different place, and that is Mudvayne's At the End of All Things.
Okay, I'm trying to remember what's on The End of All Things.
What's the song called? Not Falling was probably the big single off it. So Mudvayne are famous for two things. The first thing is there's a really good YouTube video where a guy does a fake death scream over the video to Dig. It's still one of my all-time favorite YouTube videos.
Link me up to that. That's really brilliant. Put it in the show notes.
I'm gonna make a note to put it in the show notes. Because it is. I just laugh every time.
Yeah.
And hopefully it'll make you laugh too.
I actually haven't heard The End of All Things to Come. I'm looking it up now. The one I've heard is the one with Dig on it. Which
What's
which is that Lost in that's the
Lost
one
and Found's
before.
after it.
Yeah.
It might just be called Mudvayne.
No, it is LD50.
LD50, that's the one. Yeah,
that's like classic Mudvayne.
Yep, that's the only one I've heard, unfortunately. But yeah.
So End of All Things is good, and it's 2002, year after Iowa. I think it's a bit more groovy and a bit more like more songs rather than just bursts of madness. But I think they are quite musically talented. I think the good lyrics, really good bass riff to it.
I was going to say bass because I always remember watching. I think it's the video to Happy. And like the bassist has this lovely tapping technique, which I'm just
that's on Lost and Found.
Yeah.
I would argue that that Lost and Found has more of that kind of melodic sort of the sort of. There's a lot more light and shade in Lost and Found.
Okay.
Like you've got like Fall Into Sleep, absolutely amazing track. Choices, which is really quite screamy and quite grungy. Classic Jess listening to this when she was 15 and like reliving my life. So it's absolutely amazing album.
Take home messages. Just because they're called Mudvayne doesn't mean they're not a good band. So what's your recommendation, Jess?
So I would say just Mudvayne, Lost and Found as well. Like definitely that one. But something that sort of came out around a similar time, so 2003.
Yeah.
And it's sort of, I think, a pinnacle of it's different new metal. I think.
Yeah.
It's called Confession by El Nino.
Oh, okay. That's an interesting choice.
And so I've seen them live a couple of times too, and I think that like it's quite interesting because a lot of their sort of language creeps into it as well.
Yeah.
And I think that having the
Spanish.
Yeah, so it's kind of like the Latin metal sort of, which I guess is probably not that big of a genre, or at least not that big of a genre that I've listened to.
Yeah, the only other band I can really think of would probably be like Breed 77 or something like that.
Yeah, Breed, they're Breed 77 are from Gibraltar.
Well, yeah.
How can I live and This Time's for Real are like classic sort of. They're a lot more melodic, I think, than Slipknot, but they're really sort of they've got that kind of nice breakdown bits in the middle where you can really sort of jump around in a mosh pit, and like they're very, very good. And so Confession by El Nino is my recommendation. I think we also
need to say Il Nino is like an excellent name for
it's
an excellent name for a band. I wasn't mocking your pronunciation.
Okay.
I was just saying that is a good. Like, it almost sounds like a Spanish rapper's name.
Yeah.
the illest Nino.
Oh dearie me. I almost picked as well Down the Sun. But then I decided against it because I remembered that Clown actually produced that record. But that is very sort of Slipknot-esque new metal as well. I'm trying to remember if it's just a self-titled record. I think it is. Down the Sun. There's some good songs on that. We'll Die, which sounds like a Slipknot song.
Sounds very cheery and upbeat. We all die, so make the most of your life.
But there's something else to check that's very sort of in the same vein.
So that is us until next time.
It is indeed.
And hopefully the next time won't be too long.
No, hopefully.
Apologies, life got in the way, yada yada yada. And if you want to experience more of this, the best thing to do is to leave us a review on iTunes. One day we will make it to the top of the iTunes podcast charts.
We have had a new one, actually. I did notice that there's a second review on there now, so thank you very much for whoever submitted that.
So we have doubled our reviews since the last podcast.
Pretty good. Pretty good.
Just think of it, it's good statistics. You can find our entire back catalogue, obviously, on iTunes. You can go to castironshow.co.uk. You can chat to us on Facebook, but nobody does. You can also chat to us on Twitter, and some people do. We are at Cast Iron Show. You can also find me on Twitter at AGBear, Lewis is at Sonic Yoda, and Jess is at Jessica Turner, and I'll put that into the show notes because it's a weird spelling.
This is two I's in it. So
that's still unconventional.
Okay.
Did someone take the single I version.
Yeah. I think I was probably like when Twitter started. Like my parents didn't make me a Twitter handle, so someone else had gotten just the normal Jessica Turner.
Is that something
so
that
that's-
normal parents do? Is create their children Twitter handles?
Actually, you joke, but people are taking Twitter handles for babies.
And even
Really?
like Facebook, a lot of my friends who've got kids have like Facebook pages for their kids. And I'm
Oh
like,
God, I feel
I mean,
old
how's
now.
the kid gonna feel about that in 10
I've got big. Imagine that. It's bad enough there's pictures of long-haired Alan on Facebook. Imagine pictures of, baby Alan in the bath with his wee baby penis. Everybody can see.
This is why growing up in the 90s was good. Everybody Slipknot, no baby photos on Facebook. It's all there.
Everybody knew what music you liked because it was your MSN name.
Yeah. I can agree with that.
or your email address.
Oh, dear.
Deary me.
It's been a very nice trip down memory lane.
It has
Yes.
indeed. And Jess, it's been wicked having you on. Like, come back.
Thank you guys for having me.
Do make sure to say on Twitter that you liked having Jess on the show, and in that way we can have her back.
Yeah, excellent stuff. It's nice. It's nice having a bit of a roundtable-y thing going on. But yeah, thank you very much for listening to this episode of Cast Iron Show, and we will see you next time.
See you later.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye.